What's up? It's Julian, and today I'm super excited to be showing you how to make melodic, deep bassline house in the style of Tchami. As usual, you can get the project file and samples from this video in the description. I'm going to be giving them away for free, so make sure to go pick those up. And yeah, let's dive in. So the first thing we've got going on here is the drums, which sound like this all together. So the reason why I'm playing you all these drums at the same time is because, as you can see, there's really not a whole lot of processing on these. The only thing I processed is the kick, which I'll tell you about in a second. But I do want to talk about sample selection. If you want this kind of like big Tchami style drum sound, it's all about the sample choice. And so when you can hear here, like for example with the kick, you can hear like it's a pretty punchy but still flat, like simple sort of kick. Like you don't want to go for anything like too big or too small as well. That isn't really like clicky. Like I said, it's more about sample selection. Like with the kicks, just finding those big kind of solid kicks that just don't take up too much space in the mix. And then same thing with the clap. Like you can hear, it's this very specific type of like, sort of like a 909 clap, but just a little bit harder edged. I would recommend looking at like G House and Bass House sample packs for these kind of sounds. And then same thing here with like the hi-hat and the rim shot. Like, we're just trying to find samples that really, like, punch through and have that kind of same power that the Tchami's drums have. Again, it's not really so much about processing them and doing a million things to them to make them, you know, sound really solid that way. It's more about just trying to get the right sounds and then sort of leveling them out properly in the beat. Now, or in the track. Now, one thing you'll see with this kick here is that I did do a bit of a cut with some EQ. I'll talk about this more when I get to the basses, but basically just the kick and the bass. We're clashing slightly, so what I did to remedy this was I just took an EQ8 and cut out this bass here on the kick to make room for the bass, and then on the basses you can see I have this EQ8 which is cutting out around like between 100 and 200 hertz. That's usually where the kick is lying, and that's where this kick is, so yeah, that's pretty much that. But those are the drums. Like I said, really simple. It's just a matter of finding like really good samples that punch through the mix, and then like doing slight processing like in the case of this kick. And I'll also say, like, when you go to cut out low end on your kick, it's important to do it kind of subtly, because like I used to do this actually. Sometimes I think people when they hear it, cut out the low end on your kick, they think like just make a cut like this, where you just cut it like straight up to 100 hertz and then that's that. But if you listen to that, it really doesn't have a lot of power, and if you listen to it in the mix, it's not really punching through like it was before. So the main point here is you still need some of that low end. You just want to cut out a bit of it to make room for the bass, not all of it. So that's why I have that kind of EQ cut there. So then the next thing we've got here are the basses, which sound like this. So I'll talk to you briefly about the notes. You can hear this is a pretty cool little bass pattern. It's just kind of like this bouncy thing. You can see kind of what I did here was I started with a chord progression. Like we have this G minor and then this F and then the D down here and then that C. And yeah, just kind of following that chord progression. And so what I did was I wrote the chord progression and then I just made this bass line kind of fit around it. Like by just adding notes in here and there. Again, just following the pattern. So like this first chord is here and then we go to the second chord. But you can see like when we go to the second chord, there's like all that stuff. So it's just about writing a pattern and then like defining the chords and then writing the bass line around that. So that's what I would probably recommend for these. They can be a little bit challenging, but like I said, if you just follow that structure, it's a little bit easier. What becomes difficult for me at least is when I just try and sit down and say, I'm going to write a bouncy bass line with no real direction. But again, I think a chord progression is enough direction to kind of get you started going down the right path with that. So then for the sound here, what we've got going on is it's 3 layers. So we have this one, and then this one, and then this one, which is just a sub. So for the first one here, what we've got is I made it with operator. I made all of these with operator actually. There's just like some pretty simple FM basses. And this is more of like the mid-range kind of like tone of the bass, if that makes any sense. Like this one is kind of like what you're hearing in the mid-range. And then this one is more of like the click. And then that's the sub. So the way I made this mid-range bass was using operator, like I said. And what we've got going on here is I have a square 8 waveform, which is a square wave. Excuse me. But it's got like some of the harmonics taken out essentially. Like if you see here this square D, that's the full square wave. If we go to square 8, you can see, yeah, those harmonics. That's basically what's playing. So it's just kind of like a smoother square wave. And then I'm doing some FM here with this waveform, which is based on a sine wave. I just started with the sine wave, which would be just this harmonic, and then I added that one on there. And then we got this other sine wave here, which is also doing some FM. So you can see I kind of set the envelope of oscillator B to be like this. That's what's giving it like the pluckiness. And yeah, then the only other thing to go with the oscillator too is you can see I played around with the chorus pitches, and I actually played around with using an uneven number as well. Usually, if you see my other videos, you know like when I do this technique with FM bass, usually I have the chorus pitches set to like even numbers, unless it's just at 1, like I'll have it at like 4 or 6 or something like that, which tends to have a really smooth sound. But here I wanted something a little bit rougher. So by setting the chorus pitch of oscillator B to 5, it kind of gives you that. And if we put this up to 6, you'll see. Like it just kind of becomes like a more standard FM bass. So this is a cool way to give it a little bit of a different sound. So then after that, I just have a low pass filter on here with an envelope on it, which is doing like the pluck. There's without it. And then with just makes it a bit deeper. And then finally I just have this pitch envelope, which is adding a bit of a click at the start of the sound. That's what that sounds like. And then on top of that, I just have an EQ8 cutting on some low end just to make room for the sub, really. Because, yeah, like, I didn't want this to take up too much space. So then the next layer we've got here is this sort of plucky bass, which sounds like this. And so the way that I made this one was with operator as well. You can see we have kind of a similar technique, except here I used all sine waves. So I just have those. And then you can see the second one, the chorus pitch is at 5. And again, you can hear it's got a similar sound, where it's like a little bit different, a little bit rougher. If I put this up to 6, again, it's just like a standard deep house, like donk bass. So this gives it kind of a different vibe. And this is something I hear in Tchami's music a lot as well. I don't think he's using operator to make his basses, but I do think that he's using a similar technique with the FM to get it to have that kind of texture to it that's like kind of different than just a standard like FM donk. So then after that, I just have a pitch envelope on here. Similar to that first bass, it's just adding some click. You can see. Yeah, nothing really too crazy there. And then finally, I just have an EQ8 cutting out the low end on that one. So the last thing we have here is the sub, which sounds like this. And yeah, this is really simple. All it is just a square wave, a square wave, which is going into a low pass filter to make it sound kind of sine wave E. You can see I've got a bit of an envelope on that, but not too much because I don't want it to be too much of the like high harmonics coming through. I still want it to be a sub. But yeah, so what this technique does, and why I usually do this instead of just using a sine wave, and especially for this kind of house, why it's good, is because you get a little bit more harmonic content in your sub. Like, if you just have a sine wave, you're only getting the fundamental harmonic, and if you have a square wave, you have a lot of harmonics, and then when you low pass it, you cut out a lot of those, but a few of them still come through, and it just gives you a little bit more of a harmonic sound. And what that does is it helps glue it to the other basses, because what's happening is basically, like with these basses, especially if we're cutting out the low end, these basses are pretty much only playing like higher harmonics. Like obviously the fundamental is in there, but the higher harmonics are much louder, and that's what you're paying much more attention to. That's what the sort of like tone of those basses is. But with this one, you really just need the fundamental, but those extra ones on top of it help to kind of like glue it to those, because it's essentially like, yeah, they're sharing common ground. Like the harmonics, the higher harmonics help glue this one to the other layers because of the common ground that they have. So then on top of that, I've just got a bit of saturation. You can see I just turned up the drive a bit. Again, it's just adding to making this a little bit warmer and a little bit more like harmonically rich. And then finally I have an EQ8 cutting out some stuff like between 100 and 200 hertz just to kind of clean it up. I didn't really like that like weird low mid stuff, so I just cut it out. And then yeah, so then on the group for these basses, what I've got here is I have a compressor sidechaining them to the kick, and then I have this EQ8 which is cutting out around like 100 and 200 hertz. This is like what I was talking about with the kick. If you cut out the low end on the kick and then sort of like the range where the kick is on the bass, which is between 100 and 200 hertz, you get a little bit of a cleaner mix. Like I'll show you if I turn this off and I turn off the one on the kick. They're clashing a little bit, and it's not too much to where it's like really throwing you off now, but when you hear this in the full mix, especially in this part, I feel like it can be kind of jarring, but when you add these back on, all of a sudden, it's a lot smoother. And everything has its own space, and nothing is infringing on anything else's space. So then the next layer that we've got going on here is this pluck, which sounds like this. So this is 2 layers. We have this FM sound that I made, and then this steel drum. So the FM sound was made with operator, as you would probably imagine, and it's actually a single sine wave. But what I've done is I've used the saturator here to kind of do something similar to like what FM synthesis would be doing. So with the wave shaper here, if you don't know, you're just sort of playing around with the harmonics of the sound. Like it's very similar to FM synthesis. I've talked about this a lot before, where you're kind of like playing with the harmonics of the sound and sort of like adding and subtracting different ones to make it sound different. So this is why I called this an FM sound. Even though it's just a sine wave and operator, you can see I'm doing a bit of FM with the saturator. So what I've got here is I've got a bit of drive to make it kind of warmer. And then, yeah, I use the wave shaper here pretty heavily. You can see I played around with all these little settings over here. And then we've got the depth up. And I've got the linear all the way down. So usually, by default, I believe the linear thing for wave shaper would be like that. But I turned it all the way down. And this just kind of throws the sound on its side a little bit like... It's subtle, but it just makes it a bit smoother and a little bit less like harsh with the distortion that the saturator is bringing. So then after that, I've got a bit of reverb and then a compressor sidechaining it to the kick, and then an EQ8 cutting out all the low end. And then after that, like I said, the next layer is the steel drum, which sounds like this. So it's just a one shot of a steel drum that I had that I put in here, and I thought it sounded pretty cool. I like combining these because something I think Tchami does really well in these kind of tracks when he makes them is combining like organic elements with sort of like synth elements. Like we have these basses and like the drums, which are very housey and kind of like digital sounding, but then when you add something like the steel drum in there, again, it like helps to bring the organic element and just kind of like add something extra on top that may have been missing. So like I said, the way I made this is just a one shot and simpler, and then I have that going into a bit of reverb similar to the FM sound, and then I have a compressor sidechaining it to the kick, and then finally just EQ8 cutting out the low end. Pretty standard fare there. And then for the notes on this, I'll show you them really quick, and I'll play it with the bass line. So it's just playing this really simple pattern. We're in G minor, that's the key of this track, so it's just playing this little arpeggio of the notes of G minor, and yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. It just kind of gives it like a nice sort of like movement, and it adds something on top of the bass. Like, truth be told, if we just had this bass line, the energy is there, but the vibe isn't, so these just add a bit of musical vibe on top of that. So then, the last layer we've got here is this little chord thing that I made with analog, which sounds like this. So the way that I made this was, like I said, with analog. I'll show you the notes first. So what I did here was I basically was listening to the bass line, and I wanted to write like some kind of chords that go over top of that. Similar to, like, if you know Tchami's track, Shades, like how in that, how he has like kind of just some different stuff going on with the chords. Like they're not just following the bass line, they're playing this thing on top of it that's accentuating it and making it sound just a little bit cooler and more like futuristic. That's what I was going for here. So we're just playing this stuff. It's mostly following D minor, because we're in G minor, and D minor would be the fifth of that. And yeah, really not too much I can say. Like I said, this is just following the bass line. and it's meant to give kind of like a different element on top of it that is just sort of a little bit more unexpected. So then for the synth sound, what we've got going on here is I made this with analog, so I have a saw wave and a sine wave. The sine wave is an octave up, going into a low pass filter with no envelope on it. And also a bit of white noise going in there as well. And then after that, I have the amp envelope set like that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for analog. I was just trying to make a nice kind of like analog sounding synth, I guess. So yeah, then after that, I've got a bit of chorus for some stereo width and to make it kind of smoother. And then we've got a bit of a reverb to give it some space. And then finally, I just have a compressor side chaining it to the kick, and then an EQ8 cutting out the low end. So that's pretty much it for that one. Again, it's just like an extra element to kind of add some vibe on top of everything. So that's going to be it for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments, and make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. Once again, you get the project file and samples from this video for free in the description, so make sure to go pick that up. Thank you again, everybody, and I will see you tomorrow with another tutorial.